Yes. So first of all, I worked in a lot of countries that were not necessarily as forward thinking about women in business. And I worked in a group of mostly men. So that was often challenging when I walked into a room. The respect had to be earned. I had to demonstrate, and I had to consider where I was. One of the things that I always did before I went into a new country was read about them, understand what some of the cultures were, learn a few words, because even if I didn't speak the language, coming in and saying hello in their language or how are you in their language, it really shows an amount of respect, I think, that sometimes folks don't expect, and then they think, oh, okay, well, she didn't come in expecting to be the American here, and we were supposed to listen to her. She came in respecting that that's not our language, and sometimes simple things like that. One instance in particular, I walked into a room with a lot of senior leaders, and I know I was nervous, but I was there to brief, and I kind of opened it up with a story about myself, kind of not a comedic relief type thing, but more of this was something that I did that I probably could have done better type of thing. I find that a lot of times when we're willing to demonstrate that we know that we're not perfect, or we're still learning, or we're trying to get better ourselves, it kind of softens the entry a little bit, because people, then they can look at you and be like, oh, well, you're not coming in thinking that you're going to run the show. You're human just like we are. And while I had to come in there with an element of authority, I wasn't coming in acting like I knew everything. I was coming in to brief what I had to brief to them, but at the same time recognizing that, hey, it's a two-way conversation. I want to hear what you have to say. I want your feedback. I want you to feel like you're a part of the solution. I'm just bringing you the facts, and then we're going to discuss it.
Welcome to the podcast. Today I have a great guest with me who is offering a free chapter of her book over on kellyfeatheringham.com. I'll have links in the show notes. But the book is Maximizing Teams Performance by Mastering Your ABCs. Kelly is here with me today. Kelly, welcome to the podcast. Nice to have you. How are you?
Thank you so much, David. It's wonderful to be here. I'm doing well. Thank you.
Thank you. This is so great to have you. And you are joining us where in the world today?
I am just outside Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia in a town called Ashburn.
Beautiful. Excellent. It's great to have you. Tell me what's so great about Ashburn. What should I see, do, experience if I was to make the trip? What should I do?
Wine. I'm in the heart of Virginia wine country, actually. So our county has quite a few wineries. I didn't even realize when I first moved here that Virginia had wine. You always hear about California, but they've got quite a thriving and in fact growing wine community here. So if you're into wine, there's lots of things to do. There's hiking and there's a lot of outdoor sports as well. So it's a beautiful part of the state.
Excellent. That sounds like my wife and I would be quite interested in that. That's awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about your background? You have the book now and everything, but I think getting into an author's background really helps to kind of lay a foundation to talk about the book. Can you share a little bit about your background and what you kind of experienced career-wise?
Absolutely. I actually started in government. I did a little bit of corporate first, but then I spent a long time, over 15 years, working with the government. I did program management and foreign affairs, which was really the deepest part of my team management leadership role in my career prior to the executive coaching. I got a lot of experience managing remote teams. I spent a lot of time traveling and managing different teams in different parts of the world, and it was an amazing experience. I got to see a lot of different places that I never thought that I would ever get to go. And I worked with a lot of really dedicated, hardworking folks. And my job was to support them, make sure that they had what they need to be successful, make sure they had the equipment and the staff and the right people on their right teams doing the work, and then reporting up the chain of what was going on, the status, the updates, where we were at, any challenges, and then coming up with solutions, as well as building relationships with the foreign partners that we were working with. It was an amazing experience. It was a lot of fun, a lot of hard work. And when I got kind of to towards the end, I was getting to the point where I was getting a little bit tired of travel. I loved the job, I loved the work, but I was spending a lot of time overseas. I was getting married, and I thought that I might want to spend a little bit more time close to home. So
Yeah.
we actually had executive coaches through my agency, and my coach was wonderful. She really had an impact on me in a positive way, someone that I wish I had met when I was 20, 25, because it's amazing to think about where you would be when you have somebody like that to bounce ideas and brainstorm, think about the different things. And so I decided I wanted to be like her, went back to school and did the coaching credits and got my certification and decided to do executive coaching. Started with the executive coaching and then broadened out to doing more team coaching, kind of pulling from that background when I was with the government of leading the teams and helping organizations kind of find that magic number, that magic combination of the right people in the right roles and helping to support them and understanding that it's more about the goal of the collective as opposed to any one person, that old saying of there's no I in team type of thing. So now I've really weaved that into my business.
Nice. So what kind of educational background did you have before making this pursuit? It sounds like an interesting career to be all around the world doing this and in different situations. What prepared you for this?
It was actually, I have kind of a non-traditional education. I didn't go to college until I was almost 30. I worked for most of my 20s in a variety of different roles, mostly in offices, doing kind of corporate type thing, a lot of bartending and waitressing on the side. So a different slant on the team development. I went to school for my undergrad for foreign relations and business, and then I have a master's in public administration.
Nice. Wow. So I'm just imagining being in all these different situations and with all these different people around the world. And as you mentioned on your website, you kind of parachute in to these situations. What kind of person, what kind of skills and talents do you need to be so adept in different situations to be able to come in and assess and help organize and structure and bring clarity to a situation? What kind of personal things do you need to have as a person in that situation?
Oh, that's a great question. I think one of my talents is that I know what I don't know, and I'm fine with what I don't know. And I embrace the fact that I don't know everything. I would come into country and I would work with my team, and I worked with some really talented engineers, some scientists, some technicians. I worked with some very, very smart people, and I was kind of the person that collected everything and pulled everything together, but I myself didn't carry any of that depth of knowledge that they all had. So I had to go in and kind of gather them together and really listen and hear and understand what each of them was bringing to the table, kind of assess how to put it all together, what to brief up, what to lean on, and if we needed additional resources to what to ask for. So really understanding that I'm not the brains at the table. I'm just kind of the puppet or the facilitator or the puppet master or the facilitator bringing all those wonderful ideas together and trying to figure out how to connect the puzzle pieces was probably the strength that I leaned on most.
There's been times in my past where I've sat around the table with some very intelligent people who know way more than I do, like you're mentioning. And there's times where I sat there and go, why am I here? Like, but there'd be times when the meeting would turn and I'd have an answer to a question that would help the group or whatever, some insight. And I could find my spot. But there was times where I felt quite intimidated being in a room with these people. Have you ever experienced that yourself?
All the time.
Okay.
Like I said, these were very gifted people. I think that, other than comic relief, occasionally you sit there and think, why am I here? But I do think that we all bring a different kind of a different flavor to the table. And my piece there was they needed somebody to hear them and listen to what they needed and try to figure out how to get it for them, or listen to what the frustration is. And sometimes that outside perspective of being able to ask that question of well, have you thought about this? And sometimes my lack of understanding at the depth that they were and asking the surface level question would kind of, oh, okay, have them take a step back and think, all right, well, maybe it is just that simple. Whereas other times I would ask and they'd be like, nope, not this time. We have to come up with a different solution. We have to find a different person to come in. And then that would be my job to go and find that person to bring to the team to make sure that they had the support that they needed. And being humble enough to know that I wasn't the person that needed to ask the question that day for us to be successful.
That's interesting. So how do we earn our seat at the table, Kelly? What do we do?
I think first we have to take our seat at the table. I think we have to feel confident enough to step up to the table and ask to be seated, or step up to the table and place ourselves there. I think a lot of times we talk so much nowadays about imposter syndrome and different confidence issues and things like that. I think a lot of times we don't even give ourselves the shot at the table because we think that we don't deserve it, or we're not good enough for it, or we're not smart enough for it. And sometimes it just takes any person to sit at the table to ask that one question that could move you from the gridlock or the challenge that they're facing to the next steps.
That's amazing. Any example of you coming into a room and being able to kind of read the room and understand some of the personalities in the room and how you had to kind of navigate maybe somebody that's not as cooperative possibly, or not as team focused, and you have to kind of work within the different ways that people present themselves? Is there a way that you kind of remember stepping into that kind of situation and how you handle that?
Yes. So first of all, I worked in a lot of countries that were not necessarily as forward thinking about women in business. So, and I worked in a group of mostly men. So that was often challenging when I walked into a room. The respect had to be earned. I had to demonstrate, and I had to consider where I was. One of the things that I always did before I went into a new country was read about them, understand what some of the cultures were, learn a few words, because even if I didn't speak the language, coming in and saying hello in their language or how are you in their language, it really shows an amount of respect, I think, that sometimes folks don't expect. And then they think, oh, okay, well, she didn't come in expecting to be the American here and we were supposed to listen to her. She came in respecting that that's not our language. And sometimes simple things like that. One instance in particular, I walked into a room with a lot of senior leaders, and I know I was nervous, but I was there to brief, and I kind of opened it up with a story about myself, kind of not a comedic relief type thing, but more of this was something that I did that I probably could have done better type of thing. I find that a lot of times when we're willing to demonstrate that we know that we're not perfect, or we're still learning, or we're trying to get better ourselves, it kind of softens the entry a little bit, because people then they can look at you and be like, oh, well, you're not coming in thinking that you're going to run the show. You're human just like we are. And while I had to come in there with an element of authority, I wasn't coming in acting like I knew everything. I was coming in to brief what I had to brief to them, but at the same time recognizing that, hey, it's a two-way conversation. I want to hear what you have to say. I want your feedback. I want you to feel like you're a part of the solution. I'm just bringing you the facts, and then we're going to discuss it.
Yeah, I can see that. And again, in different cultures, in different situations, how you're going to have to adjust. But I love how you approach that you take the time to even just learn a little of the language. That's a great tip. I love that. It's amazing. Let's jump a little bit into the book and your author career. I know that you have an amazing co-writer who helped you by taking you on long walks and helping you to develop this book over time, Seamus. We want to give a shout out to Seamus. But your writing partner and yourself, as you did your walks with your dog, Seamus, you kind of helped create this book and formed it. Tell me a little bit about your author journey. Did you ever think that you'd be writing a book back in the day when you were serving at the restaurant or back in school? Did you think a book was in your future?
I think I always wanted it to be. I've always been a bit of a daydreamer, and I love to write short stories. Writing was one of my favorite subjects in elementary school. You have composition class. I enjoy writing stories. I don't know that I ever thought that it would be a book used for work. That kind of evolved once I started coaching, thinking about all of the different things that I was hearing from clients and people in networking, and thinking about how I could come up with something that would be helpful to them. And it just kind of grew out of that.
In your writing process as well, we talked about this earlier, but going out for the walks with the dog with Seamus, how how did you how did you kind of fall into your writing process? Is it something you just kind of created yourself? Did you model after someone else? Kind of take me through your beginning stages of writing.
Yeah, I I started writing, and I found that I would type a few sentences and then I wouldn't like it and I would reverse, you backspace over it, then you'd start it. And it was a very slow process. So I started reading about different Googling and just reading about different ways to complete a book. And there's so many resources out there, how to complete a book in a weekend and 90 days and 5 days and all of this different thing. And I stumbled across an author that suggested that you write out your chapters on an index card. And I had read this somewhere before, but he took it a step forward and said that you should write them all out on an index card, write your title right of the chapter, and then kind of an outline and a few details, and then record each of the chapters. So you would always have your index cards in your pocket or your purse or wherever. So what I started doing is I outlined the entire book on the index cards, and then when I would take my dog Seamus for a walk, I would record it into my phone with my index card. So I'm sure my neighbors were wondering what I was doing, walking around talking to my dog about leadership
Uh,
principles while we were walking. But it was amazing. I came home and transcribed it, and before I knew it, I had 100 pages, and then it was just a matter of going back and refining, and it was very exciting because what was taking me very, very long suddenly became quite fast.
are you seeing Seamus implementing some of these great things that he's learned on his walks? Has he grown as a dog?
He's definitely grown as a leader. He's learned how to find his voice a little bit. So I'm not sure if
That's
that's
great.
a benefit, but
Yeah. No, I love it. So okay, let's kind of jump into the book. I'm excited, and you're sending a copy to me. Thank you. I'm so excited to get this. But maximizing team by mastering your ABCs. There's your acronym for your ABCs. What does the ABC stand for in the book?
it stands for assumptions, boundaries, and communications. Uh,
Okay.
it's interesting because those are the three things that I think that I coach around most frequently. And
Okay.
I just kept taking notes on some of my coaching sessions afterwards. I would make notes about some of the things that kept coming up, and it was amazing when I looked back at my notebook after a year how many times I had asked folks about what assumptions they were making, and talking to them about making stronger boundaries or reinforcing boundaries, and then how communication skills really helps us develop both of those assumptions and boundaries, right? So it just became a recurring theme that sounded to me like something that needed to be explored.
Okay. Can we kind of touch on assumptions then, and kind of how that plays out?
Absolutely.
Maybe like a higher level. Just so we don't want to give away the book away. Obviously, we want people to buy the book. But can we kind of talk about a little bit about assumptions then?
Absolutely. I think that from my perspective and what I'm seeing is that and I think we all do this, we make assumptions all day long. We make them in our personal life, we make them in our professional life. And I don't think that we do them to make assumptions to be facetious or mean or cruel in any way. In fact, I think it's very much the opposite. I think that we're constantly making assumptions, particularly in the workplace, to protect people. We don't want them to feel like we don't think they're smart enough, or they haven't thought of something, or they're not able to do something. And much to ourselves, we want to make sure that we are doing the best that we can. And I think that recognizing that sometimes when we make these assumptions to protect somebody, we're actually setting them up for failure, and by extension us, because we're assuming that they're capable of doing something, when a simple question of, hey, have you got this, or do you have any questions, or Do you understand what I'm asking you to do? Really can change the way that employees and teams work, because there's so much rework, and then there's frustration, and then the frustration grows, and it's this terrible snowball effect that all stemmed with something that probably could have been solved with a very quick question or a very quick clarification of, I need you to do this in this way, please.
Because I've seen that in team meetings where everyone's like, goes around the table, everybody has your task, everybody knows what you're accountable for, let's go. And people leave the room going, what was I supposed to do again? And then they might feel intimidated in that setting to speak up and say that they don't have the resources or they don't have what they need to complete the task. But that doesn't come out until after the meeting when it's time to implement. And then it's almost too late, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And I think
tough.
There's this fear of, oh, sorry. I feel like there's this fear of being a micromanager. Right. If I ask too many questions or I give too many details or I clarify too much, I'll be seen as a micromanager. But I think that I call it adaptive oversight. I think that there is a way that we can adjust as managers to get to know our people and what they need and how much detail they need. And we only find that out by asking questions.
And as an employee, you might feel incompetent if you feel like you don't have what your employer is asking you to do, and you might not want to speak up and show your incompetence in front of a setting of your peers. Maybe it's just a clarity issue where you didn't understand exactly what the task was. A little clarity and you'd been fine. But those assumptions can be very dangerous.
It's true. And I talk about a few things in the book, different ways that managers can do this, and so that it's not so obvious to everybody where you make them feel silly or you make them feel like they don't understand. Even in a one-on-one setting, I talk about a variety of different techniques that you can use as a leader to get to know your people and understand what their capabilities are without it being so in your face, I think is probably the best way.
Do you think the capabilities of your team can be hindered by the capabilities of the leadership in
absolutely
explaining a task or demonstrating what needs to happen? Can you limit your team just by your own personal limits as a leader?
I think so. I think that, but I guess your limits as a leader, I think is not a permanent condition. I think that one of the things I always say are the best leaders are the ones that want to be or strive to be, because I think we all have great leadership in us if we want to. And the people that recognize that becoming a great leader takes just constant growth and wanting to be better every day, and recognizing that there's always room for us to learn more. There's always room for us to get a little bit smarter. And it could be something functional. It could be something tangible in the office of just getting to know your people a little bit better, understanding the material, understanding the way they work, understanding the hierarchy or perhaps the politics of the office. There's so many things that go into becoming a really good leader that I think sometimes it can be overwhelming, and we think, oh, well, I'm a pretty good leader, so that should suffice for now, without looking at there's so many different ways that every day we can be just a tiny bit better. And it may have very little to do with our communication skills. It may have to do with something completely separate. Being able to read the room, to one of your points earlier, things like that. There's so many intangibles there that come into play, and we can't possibly be good at all of them. But I think that recognizing that they are coming into play and looking for ways to learn about them and understand them and bring them together in kind of this concert of, it's like, you know, your conductor at the front of the thing, you're trying to get all of the music to play at the right way, at the right time, and bringing in all the different things that you need to make it beautiful.
That's a great visual. I love that. I'm a music guy, so you got me there. Let's talk a little bit about boundaries. Let's switch gears over to boundaries. How does your book address this, and maybe an example of a boundary that you kind of uncover in the book? Boundaries
are so important. It's another thing that we strive to set every day, and then we don't empower them, we don't embrace them, we don't reinforce them. People walk all over us, and we teach people how to treat us, and that's in a good way and a bad way. I think that when we talk about boundaries in the book, I do a series of different case studies that are experiences from my career. Some of them might be my failings, some of them might be things that I've experienced secondhand, but I talk about different things about how you can set a boundary and then kind of sabotage it 5 minutes later because somebody pushes against it and you don't stand up and say, well, I just said this. We'll take one of the examples I give is the Monday morning meeting. You know, we all have probably had a job at some point where somebody thought it was a great idea to have a Monday morning meeting, and half the people don't come, half the people show up and they're half asleep, don't participate, right? And as a leader, if you're going to enforce this meeting, you have to say, we're going to meet at 9 o'clock. You have to be here, you have to participate, and this is what I expect of you. And then when people come and don't do it, what often happens is we let it go because we don't want to be the pain in the neck, we don't want to push back, and then 2 more people do it, and 3 more. Now you've got a situation where you have to have a conversation, right, with the team, as opposed to if one person showed up late, something simple like hey, 9 o'clock is when we're meeting, could you get here? Just to let them know that you're aware that they've now, and it might be just something simple that they were running late, but you're reestablishing that boundary in a gentle way, and then you're avoiding some of the more difficult conversations, which I find many people get to with their boundaries. They let them get pushed against, and now it's become a frustration, anger. It's ballooned throughout the team where other people have seen bad behavior, and if he does it, monkey see, monkey do, right? Now you have to have a conversation with the whole team, so it's now snowballed.
So that's an interesting thing. I just want to touch on in a second. In other cultures, time is different than in North American culture, and some places honor it to the T. Some places it's a little more flexible, and 9 o'clock meeting can be 11 o'clock meeting, because of our culture. So like you mentioned earlier, understanding where your culture and where you're parachuting into and understanding the people in the room will help eliminate some of those assumptions and maybe adjust your boundaries a little bit, because now you need to understand the people sitting at the table. So that's interesting how that kind of all ties back together. I like that. That's
Absolutely.
Great.
Well done.
Yeah. See, hey, I'm learning. Talk a little bit about the C in here, the APC, communication. This is something that a lot of people struggle with within an organization, within even personal life, everything. It touches on so many things. How can we be better at communication in our life?
Oh, communication is such a complex issue. I think that clarity and confidence, I think there's 7 C's in communication, depending on the last time I looked. There's all different alliterative ways you can remember different techniques in being better about your communication. I think at the heart of it, though, is recognizing the importance of it and how you are as a communicator. We all communicate differently. And now we've got this added versions of text messages and instant messages and email and messaging while you're on. I mean, there's the permutations are unreal at this point. And the tone is often very different depending on how and when and where you are communicating. So being aware of what you're saying and who your audience is, how you're saying it, and what your objective. I think that a lot of times we forget that communication has an objective most times. Occasionally, you and I are having a chat. We're having a chat just to shoot the breeze. But in a work setting, most conversations have an objective and have a goal. So being very aware of what the objective is, of what you're trying to get across to the other person, and then making sure that they're clear on what the objective are and checking in with them periodically to make sure that they understand, are we on the same page? Are we tracking towards the same thing? Checking in to make sure that they're seeing eye to eye with you on what you are trying to get to for your objective.
I remember one of my bosses in the past saying to me, David, don't have meetings for the sake of meetings. Think about if you took the average salary of everyone around the table for that hour, 2 hours of meeting time. Is the results of that meeting productive to the point where it justifies the cost of pulling all these people away from their tasks to sit down and discuss whatever you're discussing? And if it's not, shorten the meeting, cancel the meeting, find a better way to be a communication expert within your team without having to follow traditional meeting schedules. And I'm like, wow, like you think about how many dollars are being spent right now as people sit around this table and go, okay, are we adding value to the company or the business? Are we going forward? Or are we actually reducing in the fact of having these meetings? So I think that's always something I have in the back of my mind as I look around the table and go, okay, are we meeting our goal here? Or is this meeting actually leading to something? It's always a little thing I've had in the back of my mind. And what you're talking about seems to feed that and support that as well.
So true. It really, it's it's become a problem, I think, and in particular when we switched to remote work. It was amazing how many meetings we were having in a day as a manner of just making sure we were keeping in touch. But I think sometimes if the meeting is scheduled for an hour, we feel like we need to fill that hour, and empowering ourselves to understand that, hey, if you're done in 20 minutes, give them back that 40 minutes. Doesn't mean you can't schedule another meeting later, but we feel like we've set the hour. We have to talk about whatever for that to fill that time. And luckily, I think that's starting to change a little bit. There's been a lot of talk about it, and LinkedIn, social media, all those different things, best practices about leadership principles now. But I think for a while it was probably very frustrating for employees because you get in there and you're sitting there. Why am I here?
Yeah. And then, to also just value the people that are there. And if you can cover off one area of your business and the rest of the meeting maybe does not pertain to them, to give them that freedom to go back to their tasks and let them go. Because you don't want to add stress on top of everybody's day by having them, de-plug from where they're doing and be in a meeting. A little bit that I saw online as well about your book is you talk about how organizations can evolve in their culture as well. How are you seeing business and teams changing over time? You've seen a variety of settings, a variety of cultures. You've been in a variety of situations. What is the power of team right now, and how has it changed, and kind of maybe where are we headed a little bit in our teams?
Well, I think that for starters, the hybrid that we're experiencing with some folks remote, some folks in the office is definitely it's been a hurdle. I think that as humans, we all want and need a different approach. And I think to a leader, sometimes that can be daunting. Some people like a lot of attention. Other people like to be left alone. And it's almost at odds when we throw people remotely, because maybe the person that needs to be in an environment with lots of other people around is now floundering, whereas the person that needs to be remote is stuck in the office and they'd rather be there. So I think that's created a lot of challenges. I also think that just in general, there's been so many changes to the culture in the office, and it's become okay to talk about toxic environments. It's become more common to talk about, we talk about this quiet quitting or the silent quitting and all of these different things. People in general, from the conversations that I've been having, are struggling with trying to figure out what the new normal looks like, what a normal office environment looks like. And does it mean happy hours? Does it mean 9 to 5? Does it mean nights and weekends? Does it mean where you have a email on your phone and you can get it while you're on vacation, wherever? It's become so convoluted from what it was even 5 years ago. I think to a certain extent, I feel like we're going through some growing pains now. And I'm hopeful that it will level out a little bit as we kind of find what it is on the other side of all of the kind of the chaos that we've experienced the last few years. But I do think that to a certain extent, we have to be intentional as leaders and organizations in how we're constructing it, because without having some kind of a framework of what makes the most sense for our organization and our team and again, those objectives, where you're trying to get to, without having a goal and an objective and a plan to get there, and then figuring out how your team and your organization fits into that, and then taking into account how you're going to support, nurture, empower, and develop your staff too is very important. I'm a big believer that training your staff, empowering your staff, supporting your staff is the best way to have your staff be successful. And I'm not talking about just the entry level. I think that professional development is something that should go from the very entry level to the very senior, because we can all be learning things at all times. And there's so much out there to learn. There's so much out there that's constantly being updated. But a lot of it's the old stuff. A lot of it's the old leadership principles. We just repackage and update it because it's being heard in different ways by different people. And you never know what's going to land. You're probably a different learner than I am. And some people are visual learners. Some people are written learners. Some people need pictures. Some people need things to listen to. And understanding how your team works and spending a little bit of time understanding their strengths and how they're coming together and how they're going to work best together, I think is invaluable to an organization so that they can kind of diagnose what they need to do for their specific team, their specific people, because one size fits all doesn't work. I think that we can apply Band-Aids all around, but it's not going to be the long-term fix. You, as a leader, your staff, you should know what they need. And if you don't know, ask them, what bring them into the conversation, bring them into the solution. How can we better support you? What would make you more successful in what it is that you're doing? Do you need XYZ? Just talking to them and making sure that they feel like a part of the solution, because once you bring your people into the discussion, they have a certain amount of ownership there. They have a certain amount of buy-in, and at least for many people, they're going to be more excited about working and helping and contributing because, hey, somebody asked them, somebody's listening to them, somebody wants to know what they have to say.
So talk a little bit just before we close off in a few minutes here, who the audience is, who you had in mind for this book, and how this book is going to help a leader, an employee, whoever's reading. Who is your audience, and how is this book going to help them?
So the book is actually written from two perspectives. It's written for the leader and the employee. And I did it like that on purpose. In the case studies, I give two sides. I give the perspective of the employee as well as the leader so that we can be better at understanding kind of how sometimes we step in it. I give the chaotic case study, and then we talk about all of the different things that went right and wrong. And then I give the alternate version of it, of if all of those principles were applied. I think that anybody that is serving on a team or leading a team or wanting to lead people is a good audience for the book. And I think just in general, people that are struggling, there's a lot of assumptions and boundaries come in anywhere, right? Not just at the office. This is centered around scenarios and case studies in the office. So if you are struggling with, I love it when people say to me, they just don't get me. They just don't understand. They're just not hearing me. Yeah. We talk about that in the book.
Excellent. So as far as your coaching and everything as well, how do you serve, and can you give us a little bit of insight into that as well, so that people that might be curious and want to continue the conversation, how do they how do they work with you, and what does that look like?
Yeah. So I do a lot of one-on-one coaching. Typically my folks are in leadership for the one-on-one coaching. It could be middle management. Most of my folks are executives. They've been in leadership for some time and are leading either one or multiple teams and are struggling with trying to bring it all together. It might be something like what do we talk about? Imposter syndrome. It could be things like that. It could just be frustration with communications. So those are weekly one-on-one sessions that we sit down and we just talk about what's going on. My clients drive the sessions, so we talk about what's coming up for them that week. And the beauty of coaching is it's a no attribution. I mean, there's no judgment. It's confidential. You come, you talk if you want to brainstorm, if you want to talk through a scenario. If you have a difficult conversation, you have to let somebody go or do a reprimand, something like that. We can talk about those kinds of things and really just kind of get them feeling like they have an advocate or someone to hear them out and support them and cheer them on. I also do team coaching where I work with organizations. We do some assessments to figure out the strengths of each of the people on their team. We look at different ways to help build and bolster those strengths, do team coaching, bring them together and use scenarios that are happening in their specific office. I have general case studies, but I find it works much better if we use situations that are happening in the organization's office as our case studies so that we can actually talk through in real time how to better use leadership principles to apply those to those challenges.
So before we leave people, I'm going to ask you, Kelly, for a tip that we can use this week in our next meeting from your perspective as a leader or as an employee. I'm going to ask you for that. But before we do that, how do people get in touch with you? What's the best way to connect with you? How do we stay in touch?
Absolutely. You can email me at kelly@kellyfeatheringham.com. I'm on LinkedIn quite often. You can reach out to me there. It's just Kelly Featheringham as well. And then you can always reach out on my website, which is kellyfeatheringham.com. Yeah.
Awesome. So I'm going into a meeting this week, Kelly, and I'm looking for something that I can do to make my meetings better, to be more engaging with the people in the meeting, or something that I can use from your perspective, a practical tip. I'm asking you to parachute into my business and help me out. What can I do this week to be more effective as a leader?
Ask questions. Ask questions and listen. I think that the number one thing that we can do more for our employees is ask them to contribute and really, really listen to what they have to say. They may have something that's harebrained and not applicable at all, but making them feel like they're heard. And depending on, we could spend half an hour talking about what to do based on the response that they have, but to start with giving them an opportunity to participate, giving them an opportunity to feel like someone values their thoughts and ideas and contribution.
There we go. It's amazing. Thank you so much, Kelly, for your time. KellyFeatheringham.com. And again, the book, Maximizing Team Performance by Mastering Your ABCs. We've learned a little bit today, and you've been so gracious with your time. And I know you have a full day today. Thank you for making time for us. And we're going to send lots of people your way. Thank you, Kelly, so much.
Thanks so much. It was nice talking with you.
Hey guys, thank you for listening to the podcast. Jump over to livingthenextchapter.com, our website, and you will see a spot where you can leave a voice message. We'd love to hear your feedback. We're trying to make it as easy as possible to hear from you. So if you want your voice on this podcast, yes, that's possible. Go to livingthenextchapter.com, click the little microphone icon, leave a voice message. We'll insert your message into the podcast. Tell us where you're listening from. Tell us your favorite guest. Maybe there's a guest we should have on the podcast. Maybe you should be our next guest. Leave us a message. livingthenextchapter.com. Again, thank you so much for listening. Please share this podcast episode with one person. That's all we're asking. Meet you over there at livingthenextchapter.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. Love to hear from you. Till the next episode. It's coming up right away. Be sure you hit that subscribe button. Thank you for being part of Living the Next Chapter. Thank you for supporting our guests. Have a great day.
Mindshift Power Podcast, the podcast for teenagers and those who work with them. There's a huge problem in America today. There's a very large disconnect between teenagers and the adults who work with them. I'm looking to bridge that gap with real, raw, honest conversation, not held back by the chains of political correctness. You cannot solve a problem you do not understand. Want to understand teenagers today? Listen to this podcast. This podcast is for teens in the U.S. and Canada. To learn more, go to fatimabay.com/podcast or just look for Mindshift Power Podcast on any listening platform. I look forward to you being a faithful listener.